All right, this is a kind of a continuation of Jason Sweat's My Factory tutorial, looking at the FactoryBot sequence or the FactoryBot syntax. So I'm doing this simple FactoryBot addition. It's on inside a Rails application, so I've added a couple of classes at the top here, and also using just a kernel to create the instance dynamically. But if we run this, you can see kind of we get the similar results. So we're getting two instances here. You'll know that they have the exact same name because it's not dynamic, but more than that, they're actually the exact same, literally the exact same object. So we're actually not creating, the factory is actually not creating different instances, it's creating a single instance and then returning the same instance on every invocation of the factory. So where we actually want to go with this is kind of something along the lines where we can actually create sequences. So with FactoryBot, we can do a sequence, for example, on email. And with this, it lets us pass in a variable into the block. So here we can go something like john.smith n at example.com. So doing this, which is where we want to end up, we actually get John Smith 1, John Smith 2, John Smith 3. But because we're returning the exact same instance, that's the first problem we have to tackle, and makes us actually create a new instance each time. So in here, when we actually call create, we're just returning this record. So we actually want to make that change there. So in here, we actually will go and say this will be create instance. And we're going to do error-driven development here, and we're getting a call, an error to create. So we're going to go down and create that method. So now we're just returning nil because we're actually not doing anything here. So in here, we're just going to return the record. So we're not really doing anything at this point, just kind of rename that method. Okay, so where we actually want to go then is not creating the record in this initializer here. So let's pull that down. We actually want to do is create it down here. Now for that to work, we obviously have an issue because we have to call this model sim. So we need to actually make that into an instance variable. So now we're going to have a problem because we're now that block is also not running the correct space. So that's this line here. We actually want to be able to do this instant exec down here. And we can remove it now at this point from up top here. Now we have this block here that we actually are trying to call, but we don't have access to that block. So we want to make that also to an instance variable. Lots of extra fat fingering going on. All right, so I'm going to call this a creation block. All right, so down here, we're going to be calling it there. And once everything's all done, we're going to want to return that record. And up here, when we create the factory, we're also going to pass in that block. So if I've done everything right, this should still just run, and it does. So at this point, we've kind of not gone too far. We still have everything being kind of the static variables. But the important thing is that this instance and this instance are totally different, which means that we can now actually look at tackling the sequence question. So where we want to do is have sequence email, which then has a block where we pass in a variable and we can use it. So we run it and we're getting an error for sequence not being defined. So we want to define that on the factory. So we're going to define the sequence, and this takes a field sim, and it takes a and we're going to want to take in a block. So at this point, we are now just dropping that email address, but we can see things are running, so that's good. So in here, what we actually want to do is we're going to want to be calling our record, and we want to be sending in the field symbol, and we are going to be we're going to be looking at setting that value equal to block.call, and we want to send in a value. So let's just say 1 for now. So we're going to pass in 1 every single time to this block. So now we can see we're getting John Smith 1, John Smith 1. So this is working. Okay, now this 1 obviously has to be dynamic. So we want to have, we actually want to keep track of all the different sequences. So we're going to make another instance method. And this is just going to be a hash, and we are going to say sequence field sim has a default value of 1. And after we use that, we are going to our sequences to the field sim, and we are going to increment it by 1. And when we call in here, we're not going to pass in the what value 1. We actually want to pass in the sequences and field sim. So this is going to, on the first run through here, for each sequence, it's going to set it to a default value of 1. It's going to then call that block that we defined with the current value of the sequence, and then it's going to increment it by 1. So let's see if this works, and voila. We have a John Smith 1 and John Smith 2. We can even, so maybe now we can, just to show that these are, these sequences are different, we can, for example, go down to the URL here and make that into a sequence. It'll help if I pass in, taking that variable. So we should have John Smith 1 and 2, then Google. And we've got John Smith 1 and 2 and Google 1. And the order of this doesn't matter. So if I move Google into the middle, these sequences are linked together based on their factory and on their field, so that's adding a simple sequence process for your factory bot. And this is kind of what it's going to be doing.